A single mother brings her daughter to clean an office, but when the cold billionaire shows up, the girl says, "Isn't my mum pretty?" He looks at the new cleaner and freezes. Nina smoothed down her blue uniform for the 5th time. The fabric was clean, but she needed something to do with her hands while waiting in the lobby of Sterling Corporation. The building was intimidating. Glass and steel rising as far as the eye could see, people in suits rushing by as if every second was worth millions. And it probably was. She adjusted her bag strap on her shoulder and checked her watch. 6:45 a.m. She was 15 minutes early, as she always was on the first day of any job. First impressions mattered, especially when you were starting over from scratch for the 3rd time in 2 years. Nina Torres. The supervisor's voice brought her back to reality. "Yes, that's me. I'm Margaret, from the cleaning crew. You're on the morning shift, right?" "That's right." Nina adjusted her bag strap on her shoulder. "There's a small issue. My daughter, I couldn't find a sitter for today. Just for today, I promise." Margaret glanced to the side, where Josie sat quietly, swinging her legs from a chair that was too tall for her. The 4-year-old girl wore a simple yellow dress and clutched a worn teddy bear. Her brown hair was tied back with a colorful hair tie that had seen better days. "How old?" "4. She's quiet. She won't bother anyone." Margaret sighed, looking around the luxurious lobby. "Look, Nina, this isn't protocol, but it's your first day, and I understand how hard it is. Just for today, okay? And she stays with you at all times." "Thank you." The relief in Nina's voice was evident. "Thank you so much." Nina knew she was asking for a huge favor. But the neighbor who usually watched Josie had a family emergency, and daycare didn't open until 8. She couldn't lose this job before it even started. It paid 40% more than her previous one. As they took the elevator to the 23rd floor, Josie pressed her nose against the glass. "Mommy, are we flying?" "Almost, sweetie." The people downstairs looked like ants. Nina smiled for the first time since waking up at 5 a.m. Josie had that power to turn any situation into an adventure. It was one of the few good things left from the difficult past few years. The elevator ascended smoothly, passing the floors. Nina counted mentally. 10th floor, 15th, 20th. The higher up, the more important the people who worked there were. And she was going to clean the offices on the 23rd floor, where the big shots were. The floor was empty when they arrived. Thick carpet, glass walls, well-tended plants. Margaret explained the routine. Start with the meeting rooms, then the individual offices, and finally the restrooms. Nothing too different from what Nina had done elsewhere. People usually arrive after 8. You have about 2 peaceful hours. The CEO sometimes comes in early, but rarely before 7:30. Nina nodded, mentally organizing her work. 2 hours was enough time if she stayed focused. "Any questions? Call me at extension 2847. And remember, the little one stays with you at all times." Margaret left, leaving mother and daughter alone in the silent hallway. Nina took a deep breath. Another fresh start. Another chance to build something stable for the two of them. "Can I help, Mummy?" "No, sweetie. You just sit there quietly and draw, okay?" Nina took out a notepad and some colored pencils from her bag. "Draw something pretty for me." Josie took the supplies and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. "I'm going to draw a princess." "Perfect." Nina opened the cleaning cart and began organizing the supplies. Everything was there. Vacuum cleaner, rags, cleaning products, trash bags. She knew the routine by heart. First empty the trash, then clean surfaces, finally vacuum. She worked in silence while Josie concentrated on her drawing. Nina strived to do everything perfectly. She couldn't give any reason for complaint on her first day. This job paid better than her previous ones, and she needed it to work. The first meeting room was small, for about 6 people. Glass table, ergonomic chairs, a whiteboard on the wall. Nina worked methodically, wiped the table, arranged the chairs, vacuumed the carpet. 15 minutes and it was done. "Mommy, look." Josie showed the paper. "The princess is wearing a crown. It's beautiful, sweetie." The second meeting room was also quick. Josie remained quiet in her corner, occasionally asking questions about the colors of her pencils or showing her drawings' progress. "Josie, come here, let's go to the next room. This one is too big, Mommy. How many people fit?" Nina looked around the main meeting room. A polished mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, a projection screen that took up half the wall. The air conditioning maintained a perfect temperature, and there was a professional coffee machine in the corner. Lots. "Come on, we need to finish before people arrive." They went to the hallway of individual offices. Nina checked the list Margaret had given her. Start with the one at the end, which belonged to a director, then proceed in order until she reached the CEO's office. The difference between the offices was clear as she progressed. The first ones were smaller, functional. The ones in the middle already had thicker carpet, better furniture. The more important the person, the larger and more luxurious the space. Nina didn't care. Work was work, and she knew how to do it well. They cleaned the first office without problems. Josie settled near the window with her drawings, fascinated by the city view below. "Mommy, there's a park down there." "Is there? How cool." The second office had family photos on the desk, 3 blonde children smiling at the camera. Nina cleaned around them carefully, trying not to disturb anything personal. In the third office, Josie continued quietly with her drawings, occasionally showing the princess's progress. "Mommy, look. Now she's wearing a blue dress." "It's beautiful, sweetie." Nina tried not to look too much at the personal items on the desks. It wasn't her business if the CFO had 3 children or if the marketing director collected cat photos, but it was hard not to notice. Diplomas on the walls, trophies, photos from expensive trips, a world completely different from hers. The fourth office belonged to someone very organized, not a single paper out of place, pens aligned, agenda open precisely to the day's page. Nina cleaned everything with extra care. "Mommy, this office smells good." "It's expensive cologne, sweetie." When they reached the last office, Nina noticed that the door was different from the others, larger, more imposing. The golden plaque was polished, but she didn't get closer to read it. The name didn't matter, it was just another office to clean. "Josie, put your pencils away. Come close to me." The girl obeyed quickly, gathering her drawings. Nina slowly turned the doorknob. The room was enormous, bigger than the apartment they lived in. Her dark wood desk dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs. A bookshelf covered the entire wall, filled with thick books, discreet but certainly expensive. Paintings decorated the other walls. "Wow," Josie whispered. "Is it a castle?" "No, sweetie. It's just a very big office. Definitely the boss's office." Nina began to work methodically. Vacuumed the thick carpet that covered half the floor, cleaned the desk that was larger than her bed, organized the scattered papers without disturbing their order. It was a well-kept office, as if the person who worked there was very organized, or had a very efficient assistant. Josie sat near the panoramic window with her drawings. "Mommy, from here we can see the park." "Is that right? How cool." The view was impressive. The city stretched to the horizon, with smaller buildings looking like building blocks. Nina could see the park where she sometimes took Josie on weekends, when there was enough money for the bus. She was dusting the bookshelf when she heard something that made her heart pound. Footsteps in the hallway, firm, decisive. It was too early. Margaret said the CEO didn't arrive before 7:30, and it wasn't even 7:15 yet. "Mommy, someone's coming." "I know, sweetie. Stay quiet there." Nina looked around quickly. She hadn't finished cleaning, but she also couldn't just run out with the child. Maybe it was security doing rounds, or an employee who forgot something. The footsteps stopped at the door. Nina turned slowly, still holding the cloth in her hand. But when the door opened, Nina saw a man in an impeccable suit standing there. Tall, dark hair with some gray at the temples, a leather briefcase in his hand. He seemed surprised to find someone in the room. Nina quickly lowered her eyes. Sorry, I'm from cleaning. I can come back later if..." It was Josie who interrupted. The girl looked at the man standing in the doorway with that innocent curiosity only 4-year-olds have. She tilted her head and asked, "Don't you think my mum is pretty?" Nina felt her face flush. "Josie." But the girl continued with complete naturalness. She's the prettiest mom in the world. Everyone says so. The man at the bakery, Ms. Clara on our street, the bus driver, everyone. Don't you think so? Nina hurried to speak, trying to control the situation. Sorry about that. You can pretend I'm not here. I'll finish up and get out of your way. That's when she looked up to face him directly, ready to apologize once more, and the world stopped. Wesley. For 4.5 years, she had tried to forget that face. The clear eyes that always seemed to be analyzing everything, the firm line of his jaw, the way he got serious when he was thinking about something important. Wesley. Here, after all these years, he recognized her instantly too. Nina saw the shock in his eyes, then confusion, then something that looked like pure pain. For a second, neither of them moved. The silence in the room was deafening. Josie looked from one to the other, not understanding the tension that had suddenly filled the air. His mouth opened as if to say something, but no sound came out. Nina saw emotions passing over his face like waves. Surprise, recognition, then something more complex, regret, perhaps, or just the shock of seeing someone he clearly never expected to encounter again. He stood there, completely paralyzed, as if seeing a ghost. And then, without a word, he turned around and left. Nina heard his footsteps receding down the hallway, faster and faster until they disappeared completely. Mommy, why did the man leave? Did I say something wrong? Nina knelt in front of her daughter, trying to control her breathing. No, sweetie, you didn't say anything wrong. Sometimes adults get nervous when they meet people they knew a long time ago. You know him. The simple question almost knocked Nina over. How to explain 4 years of history to a 4-year-old? I did, a long time ago. He looked scared. Yes, I guess he did. Nina finished cleaning on autopilot. Her hands did the work, while her mind raced in circles. Wesley was here, at this company. He was the CEO. She would see him every day. How did she not realize? How did she not check before accepting the job? She knew Sterling Corporation was a big company, but she never imagined, and he had heard Josie's question. That innocent question that had come out of her daughter's mouth, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Can we go, Mommy? I'm hungry. Of course, let's get breakfast at the diner around the corner. Nina tidied the cleaning supplies in the cart, checked that she hadn't forgotten anything, and took Josie by the hand. They were heading towards the elevator when Nina heard footsteps again, different this time. Slower, hesitant. She turned. Wesley was standing in the middle of the hallway, as if he had come back but didn't quite know why. His hands trembled slightly, and he seemed to be struggling with himself. He started walking towards them. Nina felt Josie hide behind her legs. Nina. His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, controlled, but with an almost imperceptible crack. "They're Wesley." They stared at each other for a few seconds. Nina saw thousands of questions in his eyes, but she also saw that he didn't know where to start. There were so many unspoken things between them, so many explanations that were never given. She knew she had to speak first, set the rules before everything got too complicated. "Sorry about today. I needed to work. You can pretend I don't exist." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just a clear, firm boundary. Wesley opened his mouth, but Nina was already turning to leave. "Nina, wait." She stopped, but didn't turn around. "You can pretend I'm not here, Wesley. I'll do my job and leave. It doesn't have to be complicated." And then she took Josie by the hand and left. Wesley stood in the empty hallway, listening to the sound of the elevator descending. The girl's question echoed in his head. "Don't you think my mum is pretty?" He had always thought Nina was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. That was never the problem between them. The problem was that he never knew how to say it. The problem was that he never knew how to say anything that really mattered. And now she was here, after all these years, cleaning his office. Wesley leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of 4 years of regret collapsing on him all at once. He had lost Nina. And maybe he never really had the chance to tell her how much it mattered. Wesley couldn't focus all day. He tried to read reports, attended 2 meetings, signed documents his assistant placed on his desk, but his mind was elsewhere. Or rather, it was stuck in that morning moment when an innocent question from a child had shattered all the composure he had taken years to build. "Don't you think my mum is pretty?" The girl's voice echoed in his head since he ran out of the office like a coward. He had spent the day trying to find a logical explanation for what happened, but there was no logic in feelings. Nina was back in his life, and he didn't know what to do with it. It was almost 5 in the afternoon when he decided he needed to leave the office before he went crazy. He grabbed his briefcase, dismissed his assistant early, and headed to the elevator. But when the doors opened on the ground floor, he saw her. Nina was at the reception desk talking to someone on the phone. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the phone tightly. Wesley hesitated. He could leave through the back door, avoid any contact. That's what he would normally do. That's what he should do. But then he saw the girl. Josie was sitting alone in an armchair too big for her, swinging her legs. Her colored pencils were scattered on the floor around her, and she was trying to reach one that had rolled away. Nina was still on the phone, her back to her daughter. Without much thought, Wesley walked towards the girl. "Hi," he said softly. Josie looked up, recognizing the man from the office. "Hi, you dropped this." Wesley picked up the purple pencil and handed it to her. "Thank you." Josie put the pencil back in the box. "Do you work here?" "I do." Wesley looked around, making sure Nina was still occupied. "And you? Do you always come with your mom?" "Only when the neighbor can't. We don't have a lot." The girl's simple, direct answer caught Wesley by surprise. There was no self-pity in her voice, just honesty, as if it were normal for a 4-year-old to understand that resources were limited. "Does the neighbor look after you?" "Sometimes, when mommy works. But today she couldn't because her son got sick." Josie carefully organized the pencils in the box. "Mommy said it's just for today. The neighbor will be back tomorrow." Wesley sat in the armchair beside her. It was strange to be talking to a child. He had no experience with it, but Josie didn't seem to mind his awkwardness. Do you like to draw?" "I love it." Her eyes sparkled. "Look, today I drew a princess." She showed him the paper proudly. "She has a blue dress and a gold crown. That's very pretty." "Thank you. My mum always says my drawings are pretty. She sticks all of them on the fridge." Wesley smiled without realizing it. It was easy to imagine Nina sticking drawings on the fridge, celebrating every small achievement of her daughter. "And your dad?" The question came out before he could think better. "Does he also like your drawings?" Josie stopped organizing the pencils and looked at him with those big, honest eyes. "I've never met him. She says he left before he knew I existed." Wesley felt as if someone had sucked all the air out of his lungs. The girl's words echoed in his head, each syllable laden with a sadness she didn't even fully understand. "Before he knew I existed." What kind of man did that? What kind of man left and abandoned a woman like Nina alone? "Are you okay?" Josie tilted her head, concerned. "You look pale." Wesley tried to speak, but his throat was constricted. The naturalness with which the girl spoke about her father's absence shook him, as if it were normal to grow up without knowing half of who you were. Yes, I'm fine. My mom gets sad sometimes when I talk about my dad. But I don't get sad because I never met him." Josie organized the pencils in the box. "And I have mommy. She's enough." The maturity in the words of a 4-year-old was disturbing. Wesley wondered how many conversations she had witnessed, how many times she had seen Nina trying to be both mother and father. "Your mum? Is she a good mum?" "The best." Josie's eyes lit up. "She does different voices when she reads stories to me, and when I get sick, she stays up all night taking care of me, and she always saves the last spoonful of ice cream for me, even when she wants it." Wesley smiled without realizing it. It was easy to imagine Nina doing all of that. She had always been generous, always put others first. "And do you help her?" "I try. I put away my toys, I don't make a mess, and when she gets tired from work, I give her foot massages." Josie said proudly. "She says I'm the best massage therapist in the world." "I'm sure you are." But before he could continue the conversation, Nina appeared beside them. "Josie, what are you doing? I told you to stay quiet." I was talking to the man. He helped me get the pencil that fell. Nina looked at Wesley with suspicion. Thank you, but you didn't have to. Nina, Wesley began, but didn't know how to continue. How could he explain that talking to Josie had been the most human thing he had done in a long time? Come on, Josie. Get your drawings. The girl obeyed, gathering the papers and putting the pencils back in her small bag. Bye, sir, she said, waving to Wesley. Bye, he managed to respond. Nina took Josie by the hand and headed for the exit. Wesley stood still, watching them walk away. At the door, Josie let go of her mother's hand and ran back. I forgot to tell you, she said to Wesley. My birthday is in September. I'll be 5. Mommy promised a chocolate cake. And then she ran back to Nina, who was waiting for her with a controlled expression of impatience. Wesley watched them leave the building and disappear into the sidewalk crowd. He slumped into the armchair Josie had occupied. There were still a few colored pencils scattered on the floor, evidence that the conversation had indeed happened. The girl's words echoed in his head. He left before he knew I existed. Wesley couldn't stop thinking about that phrase. What kind of man did such a thing? What kind of man was cowardly enough to abandon a woman and never look back? And Nina. Nina had raised this incredible girl alone, a child who talked about massaging her mother's feet when she was tired, who worried about not making a mess, who thought that having only her mother was enough. Josie was cheerful, smart, affectionate, all because Nina had been both mother and father at the same time. Wesley held his head in his hands, feeling the weight of the revelation. For 4 years, Nina had fought alone. For 4 years, she had sacrificed to give her daughter the best. And where was the father in this story? Probably living his life without caring about the consequences of his own actions. Wesley slowly got up, picked up the colored pencils that had fallen to the floor and put them in his pocket. That conversation had changed something in him. He didn't quite know what, but something fundamental had shifted in his chest. Maybe it was admiration for Nina. Maybe it was anger at the man who abandoned her. Or maybe it was just the certainty that some people deserved much more than life had given them. Wesley parked in the building's garage where he lived and sat in his car for a few minutes. His hands still trembled slightly, a side effect of an entire afternoon trying to process what had happened. The conversation with Josie had affected him in a way he couldn't explain. The naturalness with which she spoke about not having a father, the maturity of a child who learned too early that life isn't always fair. And Nina fighting alone, working as a cleaner to support her daughter. Wesley got out of the car and went up to his apartment on the top floor, 30 floors above the city, with a panoramic view he rarely stopped to appreciate. The place was immense, modern, perfectly organized, and completely empty. He threw his briefcase on the Italian leather sofa and went straight to the bar, poured a double whiskey, and drank it in one go, feeling the liquid burn his throat. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Wesley slumped into the armchair and closed his eyes, trying to push away the memories that kept returning. But it was too late. The encounter with Nina had opened a door he had locked 4.5 years ago. The first time they really argued was over a decision about where to live. I found a perfect apartment, Wesley said, showing her the papers. 2 bedrooms, prime area, gym in the building. I've already spoken to the real estate agent. Nina looked at the papers without enthusiasm. You already decided? Of course, it's the obvious choice. Best cost-benefit, strategic location. What if I don't like it? Wesley stopped and looked at her as if the question made no sense. Why wouldn't you like it? It's objectively the best. Maybe I wanted to be part of the decision. You are participating, I'm telling you. Nina sighed and put the papers aside. Forget it. The second argument was about her job. It doesn't make sense for you to keep working at that agency, Wesley said as they had dinner. The salary is low, the environment is toxic, and you get stressed. It's the job I got. You can get something better. I know people. I can make connections. I didn't ask for help. You don't have to ask. It's logical that I would help you. Nina stopped eating. What if I don't want your help? Why wouldn't you want it? Because maybe I want to achieve things on my own, Wesley chuckled. That's silly pride, Nina. Why make it hard when it can be easy? She didn't reply. She just finished dinner in silence. The third argument was about her family. Your sister is making terrible decisions, Wesley said after a Sunday lunch. She should have gone to college instead of getting married early. She's happy. Happiness doesn't pay the bills. She'll regret it in a few years. You don't even know her properly. I know enough to see she's making a mistake. Nina stared at him. You have an opinion on everything, don't you? I have experience. It's different. Experience or arrogance? Wesley frowned. I'm trying to help. You're judging. But the argument that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening. They were planning a trip when Nina suggested a destination. What if we went to the beach, somewhere simple, just the two of us? Wesley didn't even look up from his laptop. The beach is a waste of time, and it'll still be cold in October. It's better if we go to New York. I have meetings there. We can make the most of it. Meetings? A few, but we'll have free time. That's not a vacation, Wesley. That's work with an escort. Now he looked at her. What's the problem? You like New York? The problem is you decided alone. Again. I decided because it makes more sense. Nina got up from the table where they were having dinner. You don't listen. You decide. Because I'm logical. You make me feel small. The words came out low, but they hit him like a punch. Wesley stopped what he was doing and finally paid attention. What did you say? You make me feel small, Wesley. Like my opinions don't matter. Like I'm a child who needs to be guided. Mum, that's not true. When was the last time you asked what I wanted? Really? Not just to say you'd already decided. Wesley opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't think of a single example. I don't do that. You do it all the time. And the worst part is, you don't even realize it. Nina, you're exaggerating. Am I? She laughed without humor. You chose where we were going to live, suggested where I should work, have an opinion about my family, about my friends, about my clothes. You run our lives as if I were an employee. I just want the best for you. You want what you think is best. It's not the same thing. Wesley got up too, frustrated. I don't understand what the problem is. We work well together. I take care of you. I don't want to be taken care of like a pet, Wesley. I want to be respected as a person. I respect you. You love me. It's not the same thing. The argument continued for another hour. Circles and more circles of arguments that led nowhere. Wesley trying to explain that his decisions were logical, Nina trying to explain that logic wasn't everything. In the end, she grabbed her bag and left. I need to think, was the last thing she said. Wesley thought she would come back the next day or the next week, but days passed, and nothing. After a week, he went to her apartment. Wesley opened his eyes, back in the present, but the memories kept coming, one after another. The door to Nina's apartment was unlocked. He entered calling her name, but he already knew something was wrong. The silence was different, not the silence of someone who wasn't home, but the silence of an abandoned place. The apartment was empty, not just empty of people, but empty of life. The furniture was still there, it belonged to the landlord, but all of Nina's personal belongings were gone. Clothes, books, photos, even the plant she cared for on the kitchen window. Wesley walked through the rooms in a state of shock. He opened cabinets, drawers, looking for some sign that she would return, but there was nothing. On the refrigerator, a note stuck with a magnet. Apartment returned as per contract. No outstanding issues. Nina. That was it. No explanation. No forwarding address. Not a word for him. Wesley stayed in the empty apartment for hours, trying to understand what had happened. How could someone just disappear like that? How had she managed to move without him knowing? Then he remembered. Nina never shared her plans before executing them. She only communicated once everything was decided. Ironic. She did exactly what she always accused him of doing. He tried to look for her, called her sister, who said she knew nothing. Went to her old job, but Nina had quit the week before. Tried to track down mutual friends, but found they had few. Their social life revolved around his circle. After a few frustrated attempts, pride took over. If she wanted to leave, That was her problem. He wasn't going to beg, but the question always remained, why? Wesley got up from the armchair and poured another whiskey. Now, 4.5 years later, he finally understood. She left because he never listened. She left because he made her feel small. She left because he decided everything alone and called it love. And worst of all, she was right. Wesley always thought that taking care of someone meant solving that person's problems. Choosing the best apartment, getting the best job, making the best decisions. Efficiency was love in his head. But Nina didn't want efficiency. She wanted partnership, and he never understood the difference. Wesley spent the whole night awake, reliving every argument, every unilateral decision, every time he had ignored her opinion in the name of logic. When the sun rose, he was sitting on the balcony, watching the city wake up. And for the first time in years, Wesley could clearly see his own flaws. He had lost Nina because he didn't know how to love her the way she needed to be loved. But there was something else bothering him, something that Josie's words had planted in his head, and that now grew like a poisoned seed. I've never met him. She says he left before he knew I existed. Wesley got up and went to his home office. He picked up a pen and paper and started doing calculations. Josie was going to be 5 in September. That meant she was born in September 4 years ago. He and Nina broke up in January, 4.5 years ago. 9 months. Exactly 9 months. Wesley dropped the pen, his hands trembling. The last time he and Nina were together was the night before their final argument. They had made love and then argued about the trip. She left in the early hours saying she needed to think, and she never came back because she was pregnant, and he never knew. She could be my daughter, and I never knew. The thought hit him like a ton of bricks. Josie, the 4-year-old girl who drew princesses and thought her mother was the most beautiful person in the world. The girl who never met her father, because her father never knew she existed. Wesley leaned against the wall, feeling his legs give way. Everything made sense now. Why Nina disappeared so suddenly. Why she never explained. Why she chose to raise her daughter alone. She knew what he was like. She knew he would try to control everything, decide everything, plan their lives without consulting anyone. She preferred to flee rather than give him the chance to ruin her daughter's life too. And the most painful part was that she was right. If Wesley had known about the pregnancy 4 years ago, with the mindset he had at the time, he probably would have done exactly what Nina feared. He would have taken control, decided where they would live, how the child would be raised, what school she would attend. He would have turned Nina's motherhood into a list of tasks to be executed. But now he had found them by chance. Nina cleaning his office to survive, Josie drawing princesses on the lobby floor. We don't have a lot. The girl's honest words echoed in his head. His daughter growing up with nothing while he had everything. The doubt turned into a heavy weight in his chest. Wesley spent the rest of the morning pacing the apartment, trying to process the revelation. Every expensive piece of furniture, every work of art, every symbol of success now seemed like an accusation. He had everything, and they had nothing, because he never knew they existed. And when Wesley finally managed to stop pacing in circles, it was already noon. And he knew his life had just changed forever. He had a daughter, and for 4 years, he had been an absent father without even knowing it. Wesley woke up at 5 in the morning with the feeling that he hadn't slept for even 2 minutes. The last 3 days had been a whirlwind of urgent meetings, decisions that couldn't wait, and crises that appeared out of nowhere. And amidst all that, the discovery about Josie, his daughter. The word still sounded strange in his head, but it was there, constantly pounding. Between one meeting and another, he found himself thinking about her, about the conversation they had, about the way she spoke of never having met her father, about how Nina had raised her alone all these years. Wesley showered, dressed, and went to the office before 6 in the morning. Perhaps if he could bury himself in work, he could stop thinking for a few hours. It didn't work. The first meeting was with the board of directors. 3 hours of tense discussions about the acquisition of a rival company. Wesley participated on autopilot, giving the right answers, making the necessary decisions, but his mind was elsewhere. Wesley, The chairman of the board's voice brought him back. "Do you agree with the proposal?" Wesley blinked, realizing he had missed the last 5 minutes of the discussion. "Yes, I agree." He didn't even know what he was agreeing to. The second meeting was worse. Crisis at the Chicago branch, employees threatening to strike, clients canceling contracts. Wesley tried to focus, but the words seemed to come from far away. "We don't have a lot." Josie's voice echoed in his head. His daughter, talking about not having much in life, while he sat in a meeting room that cost more than most people earned in a year. "Mr. Grant?" The regional manager was looking at him, waiting for an answer. "Sorry, can you repeat that?" More concerned glances. Wesley never asked anyone to repeat anything. He was always 3 steps ahead of everyone. Lunch was cancelled because the Chicago crisis worsened. Wesley stayed in the office, trying to resolve everything by phone and video conference. 5 continuous hours talking to lawyers, unions, managers. When he finally finished, it was already 7 in the evening, and he felt as if he had run a marathon. But he couldn't stop. He still had to review the acquisition contracts, analyze the numbers for the new marketing campaign, and prepare the presentation for investors the next morning. Wesley ordered Chinese food and continued working. At 9 in the evening, his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Grant, I'm leaving." "Do you need anything?" Wesley looked at her as if he had forgotten other people existed. "No, you can go. Will you be staying late?" A little longer. A little longer turned into midnight, then 1 in the morning, then 2. Wesley finally stopped when he realized he had read the same line of the contract 5 times without understanding anything. His head was throbbing, his eyes burned, and he felt as if he had cotton in his brain. He gathered the papers, shut down his computer, and picked up his briefcase. Time to go home. The building was empty when he left his office. Not even the security guards were visible, probably doing rounds on other floors. The hallway was silent, illuminated only by emergency lights. Wesley called the elevator and stepped inside, pressing the ground floor button. The doors closed with a soft hum, and he leaned against the back wall, closing his eyes for a second. That's when it happened. Suddenly, the elevator walls seemed to close around him. The air grew heavy, difficult to breathe. Wesley felt his chest tighten, as if someone had put a strap around his lungs and was pulling tighter and tighter. He tried to take a deep breath, but the air wouldn't reach where it should. "Calm down," he thought. "It's just exhaustion." But the sensation worsened. His heart raced, beating so loudly he could hear the sound in his ears. His hands started to tremble, and cold sweat ran down his back. The elevator descended slowly, or maybe it was stopped. He couldn't tell. Everything was a bit blurry, a bit distant. Wesley gripped the handrail, trying to focus on something concrete. The cold metal of the rail, the floor numbers on the panel, anything to bring him back to reality. But it was getting worse. Breathing was increasingly difficult. He dropped his briefcase, which hit the floor with a dull thud. His legs buckled, and he slid down the wall until he was sitting on the elevator floor. "What's happening to me?" Wesley tried to loosen his tie, but his hands trembled so much he could barely grasp the fabric. His head was spinning, and he was sure he would pass out at any moment. That's when the elevator stopped. The doors opened with a deafening creak. Wesley expected to see the ground floor, the empty lobby, maybe a security guard. Instead, he saw Nina. She was standing in front of the elevator, holding her cleaning cart. She was still in her blue uniform, her hair in a simple ponytail. She had come to get something she forgot, or perhaps to work overtime. When she saw him sitting on the elevator floor, trembling and gasping, her expression changed completely. "Wesley?" She dropped everything and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button to hold the doors open. "What happened?" He tried to answer, but couldn't form words. His chest rose and fell rapidly, as if he had run for miles. Nina knelt beside him without hesitation. "Look at me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Wesley, look at me." He raised his eyes and met hers, brown, concerned, but without panic. "Breathe," Nina said softly. "Slowly." "With me?" She took a deep breath, exaggerating the movement so he could see. Wesley tried to copy, but it was still difficult. "Again," she said, "don't force it. Just let it happen. Nina placed a hand on his arm, a light but firm touch. You don't have to pretend to be strong all the time. The words hit him in an unexpected way. No one had ever told him that. No one had ever given him permission to be weak. Wesley felt something break in his chest, not physically, but something emotional he had held tightly for too many years. And then he let go. Let his shoulders relax. Let his breathing become irregular. Let Nina take care of him. There, she said softly. It's okay. They stayed like that for a few minutes. Nina sitting on the dirty elevator floor, holding his arm, speaking softly to calm him. Wesley trying to remember how to breathe normally. Gradually, the world came back into focus. His heart slowed its rhythm. Air returned to his lungs. Better? Nina asked. Wesley nodded, still a bit dizzy. Sorry. I don't know what... No need to apologize. He looked at her, really looked. Nina was different. Older, of course, but there was something more. A firmness that hadn't been there before. A confidence he didn't remember seeing. You shouldn't be here so late, he said, his voice still weak. Neither should you. Wesley chuckled without humor. I always stay late. I know you always did. The past hung between them like a heavy cloud. They hadn't talked about what happened 4 years ago. Not really. Nina, Wesley began but stopped. Where to start? How to apologize for 4 years of regret? You what? I'm sorry. The words came out simple, direct, without elaboration, without justifications. Nina studied him for a few seconds. For what? For everything. For how I was. For how things ended. For... He gestured vaguely. For everything. Oh. Wesley expected anger. He expected her to say it was too late, that apologies changed nothing. Instead, Nina sighed. You were arrogant, Wesley, she said, her voice factual, without malice. You talked over me, about everything as if my opinion was optional. He lowered his head. I know. You decided where we were going to live, where I should work, what was best for me, and when I complained, you explained why I was wrong. Nina. I left because I loved myself. The phrase caught him by surprise. Wesley looked up at her. What? I left because I loved myself, Nina repeated. Because I knew if I stayed, I'd end up becoming a shadow. I'd accept that you were always right, that my voice didn't matter, and I didn't want to be that person. Wesley felt the weight of her words. There was no accusation in Nina's voice, just a painful statement of fact. Do you still think I'm like that? He asked. Nina tilted her head, considering the question. No, you're different. How do you know? Because you just had a panic attack in an elevator and let me take care of you. The Wesley from 4 years ago would never have done that. She was right. The Wesley from 4 years ago would have stood up, straightened his suit and pretended nothing had happened. But you're learning now what you ignored for years, Nina continued. What is it? That you're human, that everyone is. Wesley was silent, processing her words. It was true. He had spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to control everything, that he forgot that fragility wasn't a flaw. It was just part of being human. How can you, he asked, take care of me after everything that happened? Nina gave a small, sad smile. Because I knew you when you weren't like this. Before you decided you had to be indestructible, I don't remember being different. I do. They sat on the elevator floor for a few more minutes, in silence. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had said important things and needed time to absorb them. Finally, Nina stood up. Can you stand? Wesley tested his legs. He was still a bit dizzy, but he could stand. I think so. She helped him up, picked up his briefcase from the floor, and pressed the ground floor button. Will you be okay driving? She asked as the elevator descended. I will. Are you sure? Wesley looked at her, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. I am. The doors opened on the ground floor. Nina exited first, Wesley behind her. Nina, he said when they reached the lobby. What? Thank you, she nodded. You're welcome. Wesley headed towards the garage, but stopped at the door and turned around. Nina. You said you knew me when I wasn't like this. What was I like? Nina stood still for a moment, as if deciding whether to answer. You were kind, she finally said, and funny. And you were afraid of some things, like everyone else. You didn't pretend you knew everything. And what changed? You achieved success, and you decided that success meant never being wrong. Wesley absorbed her words. It was a simple observation, but it explained a lot. Good night, Wesley, Nina said. Good night. He watched her pick up the cleaning cart and head to the service elevators. She probably still had work to do. Wesley went to his car, drove home in silence, and went up to his apartment. But this time, the silence wasn't deafening. This time, it seemed something had changed. For the first time in years, someone had taken care of him. Someone had seen him vulnerable and hadn't turned their back. And for the first time in a long time, Wesley didn't feel alone. Wesley arrived at the office the next morning with a strange feeling. The conversation with Nina had affected him in a way he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, someone had seen him without the masks he wore every day. And that made him question other things. Instead of going straight to his office, as he always did, Wesley decided to walk around the floors. When was the last time he had done that? When was the last time he really paid attention to the people who worked for him? He started on the 15th floor, where the finance department was located. Wesley exited the elevator and walked down the hallway. He had no specific reason to be there, just curiosity. He wanted to see how things worked when he wasn't around. The hallway was busy, people coming and going, talking, carrying papers and folders, a normal work environment, until he appeared. The first person to see him was a young analyst. She was animatedly talking to a colleague about some project, laughing at an inside joke. When her eyes met Wesley's, the smile died on her face. "Good morning, Mr. Grant," she said, her voice polite but tense. "Good morning." The conversation she was having stopped completely. The colleague next to her also became serious, as if they had been caught doing something wrong. Wesley continued walking. Further ahead, a group of 3 employees was gathered near the water cooler, talking quietly. When they saw Wesley approaching, the group immediately dispersed. One of them murmured, "Excuse me," and practically ran in the opposite direction. The other 2 stood still, trying to look busy with anything other than the conversation they were having. "Is everything all right here?" Wesley asked. "Yes, sir. Everything's great," one of them quickly replied. "Back to work." And they really did go back, leaving Wesley alone in the hallway. Strange, Wesley proceeded to the marketing department. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe those employees really had something urgent to do. But in marketing, the same thing happened. He passed by the open room where the designers worked. There was a good energy there. Low music playing in the background, people collaborating on projects, a creative and relaxed atmosphere. Until Wesley walked in. The first to notice was a young man with colored hair who was explaining something on a screen. When he saw Wesley, he stopped mid-sentence. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice a tone higher than usual. All other conversations in the room ceased. 8 people turned to look at Wesley, and all had the same expression, a mixture of surprise and anxiety. "I don't mean to interrupt," Wesley said, "just stopping by to see how things are." "They're great," the team supervisor quickly replied. "Everything's on track, meeting all deadlines." She spoke as if she were defending herself against an accusation Wesley hadn't made. "That's good," he said. "Carry on." But when Wesley left the room, no one spoke again. He heard only silence behind him. In the Human Resources Department, it happened again, an informal meeting that abruptly ended when he appeared, people finding excuses to leave the common area when they saw him approaching. In legal, the same thing. Conversations that died, smiles that disappeared, a palpable tension that took over the environment. Wesley began to pay attention to the details, the way people changed their posture when they saw him, how they lowered their voices, how they avoided direct eye contact, how their expressions became carefully neutral. It wasn't respect, it was fear. In the sales department, Wesley stopped near a workstation where 2 salespeople were analyzing numbers on a spreadsheet. "How are this month's results?" he asked. Both stiffened. One began to explain the numbers hurriedly. as if being interrogated. The other remained silent, staring intently at the computer screen. Wesley asked a few more basic questions about ongoing projects. Normal questions, the kind any CEO would ask. But the responses he received were tense, formal, as if every word was carefully weighed before being spoken. When he walked away, he heard one of the salespeople let out the breath he had been holding. Wesley continued his walk through the floors, and the pattern repeated, always the same. Conversations that stopped, people who dispersed, an uncomfortable silence that filled the environments he passed through. It was as if his presence were a fire alarm. On the 20th floor, Wesley stopped near the elevators and pretended to check his phone. In reality, he was observing a group of employees was waiting for the elevator, talking about their weekend plans. When the doors opened and they saw Wesley inside, the conversation died immediately. They entered in silence, pressed their floor buttons, and stood like soldiers at attention. No one spoke a word during the entire descent. When they exited, Wesley heard one of them whisper to the other, "That was close." Close. His presence caused fear. Wesley returned to his office with a strange feeling in his stomach. He closed the door, sat in his chair, and tried to process what he had observed. For the first time, he was seeing his company and himself from a different perspective. "I have everything," he thought, looking around the luxurious office, "but I'm alone." It was true. He had power, money, success. He ran a company with hundreds of employees, made decisions that affected thousands of people, but he was completely isolated. Am I really that bad? The question hurt more than he expected. Wesley had always thought people respected him. He thought the efficiency with which everyone worked when he was around was a sign of professional admiration. But now he realized the truth. He was never respected. He was feared. People didn't work well because they admired him. They worked well because they were afraid to disappoint him, afraid of the consequences, afraid of his reaction. And that wasn't admiration, it was distance. Wesley remembered a conversation he had with Nina years ago. She had mentioned that he didn't have many close friends at work. At the time, he said mixing personal and professional life wasn't smart. But perhaps the truth was different. Perhaps he simply didn't know how to connect with people without using authority. Perhaps he was the kind of person people preferred to avoid. The realization was like a punch to the gut. Wesley thought of Josie, how easily she talked to him in the lobby. No fear, no tension. Just a child being a child, asking honest questions. When was the last time an adult talked to him that way? When was the last time someone treated him as a person, not a position? The answer came immediately. Nina in the elevator, the night before. She had seen him vulnerable and hadn't fled, hadn't used the situation against him, just took care of him. And that was so rare in his life that he was still processing it. Wesley got up and went to the window. The city stretched out below, millions of people living their lives, some happy, some sad, some lonely, like him. The difference was that his loneliness was self-imposed. He had built walls around himself and called it leadership. He had confused fear with respect, isolation with authority. And now, at 34, he was beginning to understand the price he had paid. He had everything, and he had nothing. Wesley stood at the window for a long time, watching the city and reflecting on the choices that had led him there. For the first time in his life, he questioned whether success was truly worth it when you had no one to share it with. Wesley spent the entire morning rehearsing the conversation in his head, every word, every possible reaction, every scenario that could happen. But no matter how much he tried to prepare, he couldn't control the nervousness growing in his chest. 3 days had passed since the epiphany in the company hallways. 3 days since he understood that he had confused fear with respect his entire life. And 3 days since the certainty about Josie had crystallized in his mind. She was his daughter. It was no longer a suspicion or a possibility. It was a certainty that pulsed within him like a second heart. Wesley checked his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Almost noon. Nina usually took her lunch break around this time. He had observed her routine in the past few days, trying to find the right moment for the conversation. He got up from his desk, smoothed his suit, and left the office. Nina was in the hallway on the 22nd floor, meticulously cleaning the windows. She always did everything carefully, Wesley had noticed. Never rushed, never poorly done. "Nina," he said, approaching. She turned, a little surprised to see him there. "Wesley, has something happened? Can I talk to you? Privately?" Nina hesitated for a second. Since their conversation in the elevator, they had politely greeted each other when they met, but nothing more. She seemed to be maintaining the distance that had always existed between them. "About what?" "It's important." Nina looked around, making sure no one else was nearby. "Okay. In my office." She nodded and put the cleaning supplies back in the cart. They went up one floor in silence. Wesley tried to organize his thoughts, decide where to begin. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many questions he needed to ask. When they arrived at the office, Wesley closed the door and gestured to one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Do you want to sit down?" Nina sat down, but stayed on the edge of the chair as if ready to leave at any moment. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and she watched him with that careful expression he knew well. Wesley sat behind the desk, then thought better of it and got up again. He didn't want the desk between them. He didn't want it to feel like a business meeting. He sat in the chair beside her. "Nina, I need to ask you something." "What?" Wesley took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this question 1,000 times, but now that the moment arrived, the words seemed enormous in his mouth. "Is Josie my daughter?" The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Nina didn't seem surprised by the question. In fact, she seemed to have been expecting it. She studied him for a moment, as if deciding something important. Then, with a serenity Wesley hadn't expected, she said, "Yes." One word. Simple, direct, final, and it changed everything. Wesley felt the ground move beneath his feet. Even knowing it was true, even being sure hearing the confirmation was like being punched. "Yes," he repeated, more to himself than to her. "Yes," Nina confirmed again. Wesley remained silent for a minute, trying to absorb the reality. He had a daughter, a 4-year-old girl who drew princesses and thought her mother was the most beautiful person in the world. A daughter he had never known. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out softer than he intended. Nina sighed, as if she had rehearsed this answer too. "Because you wouldn't have known what to do," she said, "and she deserved more than your logic." The words hit him like a slap. Not because of their cruelty, Nina didn't speak with anger or resentment. She spoke like someone explaining a fact. Wesley opened his mouth to protest, to say she was wrong, that he would have known what to do, but he stopped, because she was right. The Wesley from 4 years ago would have turned the pregnancy into a series of logistical decisions. He would have planned everything, controlled everything, decided how the child would be raised without consulting Nina. He would have done exactly what Nina feared most. "You're right," he said, and the admission hurt more than he expected. Nina blinked, clearly surprised by his reaction. She had prepared for an argument, for having to defend herself, not for agreement. "So I wouldn't have known what to do," Wesley continued. "I would have tried to control everything. I would have made a to-do list for your motherhood." Nina said nothing, just observed him. "I would have ruined everything," he admitted, "like I always did." Wesley got up and went to the window, needing a moment to compose himself. Below, the city continued its normal rhythm, people living their lives, taking care of their families, being present for those they loved, things he never knew how to do. "She's incredible," he said, still with his back to Nina. "Josie, she's everything I'm not." "How so?" Wesley turned around. "She's sweet, honest, generous. She worries about you when you're tired. She thinks having only her mom is enough. It is enough, I know, and that breaks me." Wesley returned to his chair. "Because I should have been there, should have helped, should have been present." "Wesley!" "No," he interrupted her. "Let me talk, please." Nina nodded. "I spent 4 years wondering why you left. I thought it was drama, that you were exaggerating about our differences." Wesley paused. "But it wasn't drama. You were protecting yourself, and protecting her." Nina remained silent, but Wesley saw something change in her expression. "You did the right thing," he said, "and I hate to admit it, but you did." Wesley leaned forward, his hands clasped. But now I know. Now I understand what I did wrong. And I need to try to be different. Why? The question caught him by surprise. What do you mean, why? Why now? Why do you want to be different now? Wesley thought about the answer. It was a fair question. Because I saw what my leadership truly causes. I saw how people react to me. I saw that I have everything and nothing at the same time. He paused. And because she deserves a better father than the man I was. Nina studied him for a long moment. What do you want, Wesley? I want several things. He took a deep breath. First, I want to offer you a better position. Something with fair hours, a decent salary. You shouldn't be cleaning offices to survive. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's responsibility. My responsibility. Wesley corrected himself. Our responsibility. You work hard. You have experience. You deserve a better opportunity. Nina didn't respond immediately, so he continued. And also, Wesley hesitated, because the next part was the most important. I want to take care of Josie's future. Be present. Be the father she needs. You don't even know her. I know, and that's my fault, but I want to know her. I want to learn how to be her father. Nina crossed her arms. And how do you intend to do that? Slowly, in whatever way you think is best. I don't want to invade your lives or change everything at once. Wesley leaned closer. I want to become a better man for her. I want her to have a father worth knowing. Nina was silent for a long time. Wesley could see her thoughts racing, analyzing his words, looking for signs of lies or manipulation. Finally, she spoke. You know she won't just accept you as her father, right? She's 4, she doesn't know you. To her, you're just the man who works in the building where her mom cleans. I know. And you know there's no guarantee it will work out. That maybe you'll discover being a father is harder than you imagine. I know that too. And you know I will protect her above all else. That if I see any sign that you're harming her, I'll cut contact immediately. Wesley nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. Nina watched him a little longer, and Wesley saw the exact moment something changed in her expression. It wasn't trust yet, far from it, but it was something akin to cautious hope. What, are you serious? Completely. Because this isn't a game, Wesley. She's a child. If you enter her life and then give up when it gets difficult, you'll hurt her in a way that can't be fixed. I understand. Nina got up and went to the window, looking out at the city below. Wesley remained seated, waiting. When she turned, there was something new on her face. It wasn't forgiveness. Wesley knew that would take time, if it ever happened, but it was acceptance. Then start, she said. How? Be the man you say you want to be. She'll see you for who you are, and she'll know if she can trust you. Wesley nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. What if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you'll have tried. Nina walked to the door but stopped before opening it. Wesley? Yes? She likes bedtime stories and chocolate ice cream, and she's happy when someone pays attention to her drawings. Wesley smiled for the first time in days. Thank you for telling me. And Wesley? Yes? Don't disappoint her. She's had enough disappointment for a lifetime. Nina left, closing the door behind her. Wesley was left alone in the office, looking at the chair where she had been sitting. He had a daughter, and for the first time in his life, he had something truly worth fighting for. Nina spent the entire week thinking about how to have this conversation. Ever since Wesley had confirmed that he wanted to be present in Josie's life, she knew the time would come to explain to her daughter who he really was. But how do you explain to a 4-year-old that the man she met at the office is the father she never had? How do you prepare a child for something that could change her life forever? Nina had tried a few times during the week, but always lost her nerve. Josie was happy playing, living her uncomplicated childhood. Part of Nina wanted to protect that innocence for a little longer, but she knew it wasn't fair. Neither to Josie nor to Wesley. It was on a Friday night after dinner that Nina finally found the courage. They were in the living room of the small apartment they shared. Josie was on the floor, coloring a new drawing, a princess in a green dress this time. Nina was on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but actually observing her daughter. "Josie, sweetie, can I talk to you?" "Of course, Mommy." Josie didn't look up from her drawing. "So how do you think this color looks good on the dress?" "It looks beautiful." Nina turned off the TV and sat on the floor beside her daughter. "But I want to talk about something important." Now Josie paid attention. She put down her colored pencil and turned to Nina, crossing her legs. "About what?" Nina took a deep breath. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head, but now that the time came, the words seemed inadequate. "Remember Wesley, the man who works in the building where I clean? The one who asked if you were pretty?" Nina smiled despite her nervousness. "That's the one. I remember, he looked sad." The observation caught Nina by surprise. Josie had always been perceptive for her age, but sometimes she forgot how well she read people. "Why did you think he was sad?" Josie thought for a moment, with that seriousness that sometimes took hold of her. He smiled, but his eyes didn't smile with him, and he stood there for a long time watching us leave. Nina felt her heart clench. It was exactly what she had seen on Wesley's face that day, a deep sadness he tried to hide. "Josie, I need to tell you something about Wesley." "Is he sick?" "No, sweetie, he's not sick." Nina took her daughter's hands in hers. "Remember you always ask about your dad?" Josie nodded. It was a question that came up now and then, especially when she saw other children with their fathers. "And I always told you your dad left before he knew you existed." "Uh-huh," Nina swallowed hard. "Well, I found out that Wesley is your dad." Josie stared at her for a few seconds, unblinking. "Wesley?" "Yes." "The Wesley who works in the building?" "Yes." Josie let go of Nina's hands and fell silent. Nina could almost see her daughter's thoughts organizing, trying to process the information. "He's my dad?" Josie finally asked. "Yes." "But you said my dad left." Nina sighed. How to explain the complexity of the situation to a child? "He didn't know you existed, sweetie. When I found out you were in my belly, I didn't tell him." "Why?" The innocent question was like a stab. How could she explain that she was afraid Wesley would try to control their lives, that she preferred to raise her daughter alone rather than give him the chance to ruin everything? Because sometimes adults make bad decisions when they're confused, Nina said, choosing her words carefully. "And I was confused at the time." Josie absorbed this in silence. Nina waited, giving her time to process. "He knows now?" Josie asked. "He does." "And he wants to be my dad?" The question almost broke Nina's heart. There was so much cautious hope in Josie's voice, as if she were protecting herself from potential disappointment. "He does. Yes, very much." Josie was silent for a long time. Nina watched her, seeing the emotions pass across her daughter's little face. Confusion, hope, fear, curiosity. "Can I get to know him better?" Josie finally asked. "Of course, sweetie. If you want to." "I do." Nina smiled, feeling an enormous relief. "Then I'll call him. How about you two meet tomorrow?" "Where?" "At the park." "You like the park?" Josie nodded, then went back to picking up her colored pencil. But Nina noticed she wasn't really coloring, just holding the pencil, lost in thought. "Josie, are you okay?" The girl looked up. "Say it, Mommy. If he's my dad, why didn't he seem to know me at the office?" Another question that cut deep. Nina pulled Josie onto her lap. "Because he really didn't know you, sweetie. He only found out you were his daughter later." "How did he find out?" "He did the math, about when you were born." Josie became thoughtful. "And now he wants to know me." "He does. Very much." "What if I don't like him?" Nina kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Then you don't have to spend time with him. You just do what you want to do." "What if he doesn't like me?" The question broke Nina's heart. "That's impossible, Josie. Impossible." "How do you know?" "Because you're impossible not to like. And because I saw how he looked at you that day. He already likes you." Josie snuggled closer into Nina's lap. "Will he live with us?" "No, he has his house. We have ours. But if you two get along, he can visit us sometimes. Or you can go out together, like other dads do." like other dads do. They stayed like that for a while, Josie processing the news, Nina trying not to let her own anxieties show. "Mommy." "What, sweetie? Do you think he likes drawing?" Nina smiled. "There's only one way to find out." The next day, Nina took Josie to the park at 2 in the afternoon. It was a small but well-maintained park, with some playgrounds and plenty of space to run. Josie had always liked it there. Wesley was already waiting when they arrived. He was sitting on a bench, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, a very different version of the suited executive Josie knew. When he saw them approaching, he stood up. Nina could see the nervousness in his posture, the way he ran a hand through his hair. "Hi," he said as they approached. "Hi," Nina replied. "Josie, remember Wesley?" Josie was half hidden behind Nina, but she waved shyly. "Hi, Josie," Wesley said, bending down to her height. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." The girl came out from behind Nina, but still kept her distance. "Hi," Nina looked between the two. "How about I let you two talk for a bit? I'll be over there on that bench, okay?" Josie looked at her with a bit of panic. "Are you leaving?" "No, sweetie, I'll be right there. You can see me the whole time." Wesley also seemed nervous about being alone with Josie, but he nodded. Nina moved away to a nearby bench, but from where she could see and hear everything. Wesley sat on the grass, cross-legged. Josie hesitated, then sat in front of him, but maintaining a safe distance. "So," Wesley began, clearly not knowing how to talk to a child. "Your mum told me you like to draw." Josie's eyes lit up a little. "I do. What do you like to draw?" "Princesses and castles and sometimes unicorns. Unicorns must be hard to draw." "A little bit, but I'm getting better," Wesley smiled. "I'm sure you are. Your mum always says you're very talented." Josie glanced towards Nina, then back at Wesley. "She told me about you." "She did. That you're my dad." Wesley swallowed hard. Hearing it from her mouth was different from knowing it in the abstract. "Yes, I am." "You didn't know I existed?" The brutal honesty of the question caught Wesley off guard. "No, I didn't know. And now you know." "Now I know." Josie was silent for a few moments, studying his face. "Why didn't you know?" Wesley thought about the answer. How to explain the complexity of the situation to a child without blaming Nina. "Because sometimes adults get confused and make bad decisions," he said, echoing the words Nina had used. "And when you were born, your mom and I were confused. But now you're not confused anymore." "No." "Now we understand things better." Josie nodded, as if that made sense to her. "Do you want to be my dad?" she asked. The simple question almost knocked Wesley over. "Very much. More than anything in the world." "Why?" Wesley thought about the answer. Because you seem like an amazing person, and because I lost a lot of time without knowing you. And because I want to learn how to be your dad." "You don't know how to be a dad." "No, I've never been a dad before. You'll have to teach me." Josie smiled for the first time since they arrived. "I can teach you." "What kinds of things would you like to teach me?" "Well," Josie became thoughtful, "dads need to know about drawings, and about stories, and about ice cream. Is ice cream very important?" "Very, especially chocolate." Wesley laughed. "I'll remember that." They talked for a few more minutes about simple things. Josie told him about her favorite drawings, about the neighbor who sometimes watched her, about how she helped her mom at home. Wesley listened to every word as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. "Wesley," Josie said after a while. "Yes? Can I call you Daddy?" Wesley felt as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The question was so simple, so innocent, but it carried the weight of everything he had lost and everything he could gain. He choked, trying to find the words. You want to call me Daddy?" "If you don't mind." Wesley knelt on the grass, getting down to her height. "I would mind if you didn't want to." Josie smiled, a small but genuine smile. And then, without warning, she threw herself into his arms. It was the most genuine hug Wesley had ever received in his life. Small arms around his neck, the smell of children's shampoo, the warm, solid weight of his daughter, nestling against him with complete trust. Wesley held her as if she were made of crystal, and at the same time, as if he would never let her go. And then, for the first time in decades, he cried. They weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of pure gratitude, of relief, of a happiness so intense it couldn't be contained in his chest. He cried for all the moments he missed, for the first steps he didn't see, for the first words he didn't hear, for 4 years of drawings that weren't stuck on his fridge. He cried for the incredible child Nina had raised alone, for the strength she had, for the difficult choices she made, for protecting Josie when he wasn't there to protect her. And he cried out of gratitude for being here now, for having a second chance, for Josie opening her heart to him even when she had no reason to trust. "Daddy," Josie said, pulling back a little to look at him. "Say us, why are you crying?" Wesley wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smiling through his tears. "Because I'm very happy," he said. "Very, very happy. Happy because I called you Daddy. Happy because I finally met you, and because you're even more incredible than I imagined." Josie smiled and hugged him again. "Think I'm happy too." From the bench where she sat, Nina watched the scene with tears in her own eyes. She had made the right decision by giving Wesley this chance. She could see in the way he held Josie, in the way he looked at her, that something fundamental had changed in him. This wasn't the man she had left 4 years ago. This was someone who had learned the value of what truly mattered. "Daddy," Josie said, still in Wesley's arms. "Yes." "Do you want to see my drawings? More than anything. And do you want to have ice cream with me?" "Of course." "And do you want to meet my teddy bear?" "It would be an honor." Josie laughed, a pure and happy sound that filled the park. "And then come on," she said, taking his hand. "Let's go home. I have so much to show you." Wesley stood up, still holding his daughter's small hand, and looked towards Nina. She approached, and the three walked together towards the park exit. They weren't a traditional family, perhaps they never would be, but they were something new, something being built with care and honesty, and for the first time in his life, Wesley understood what it meant to be whole. 3 months later, Wesley adjusted his tie and checked his watch. 2 in the afternoon, still had time to get to school before the meeting started. 4 months ago, school meetings didn't even exist in his world. Now he was cancelling work commitments to discuss Josie's progress in preschool. "Mr. Grant," his assistant appeared at the door. "Are you going to the school meeting?" "Yes, Carol. Cancel the 3 o'clock call." Carol smiled. In the past few months, she had seen changes in her boss she didn't even know were possible. He smiled more, said please, and thank you, and sometimes even asked how her weekend had been. At school, Josie's teacher showed some drawings. "Look what she made this week." Wesley carefully took the drawings. One was of a family, a woman, a man, and a child holding hands. In the corner of the paper, "Me, Mommy, and Daddy" was written in crooked capital letters. He felt his throat tighten. In 3 months, he had gone from a stranger to someone important enough to appear in her drawings. After the meeting, he went to pick up Josie from the classroom. "Daddy!" She ran to him, and Wesley knelt down to receive the daily hug that had become the best part of his days. "Hi, Princess. How was your day?" "Good." "Did the teacher show you my drawing?" "She did, yes. I'm going to stick it on the fridge in my office." Josie laughed. "You don't have a fridge in your office, Daddy. Then I'll buy one just for your drawings." In the car, Josie told him about her day at school while Wesley drove. He listened to every word, asked questions, laughed at her stories. 4 months ago, he wouldn't even know how to talk to a child. Now these conversations were the most important part of his day. When they arrived at the apartment, Nina was in the kitchen preparing dinner. "How was the meeting?" she asked. "She's doing really well, and look what she made." Wesley showed her the family drawing. Nina took the paper and smiled. "It's beautiful, sweetie." During dinner, Wesley watched the two of them talking, laughing, sharing their day. It was a simple scene, but it filled an emptiness he didn't even know existed. Afterward, while they cleaned up the kitchen together, Nina asked about his work. "Different," Wesley replied. "Today I listened more than I spoke in the meeting with the Japanese investors. I let them explain what they wanted before suggesting solutions. And it worked. It worked better than I expected. They approved the project right away." It was true. In the past few months, Wesley had completely changed his approach at work. Instead of imposing decisions, He listened to opinions. Instead of intimidating employees, he tried to understand their perspectives. And surprisingly, the company was doing better than ever. "People don't seem afraid of you anymore," Nina observed. Last week, an intern suggested a change in the marketing process. A few months ago, she wouldn't even come near my office. Nina had been observing Wesley for months. She saw how he arrived every day at 5 on the dot to pick up Josie, how he never cancelled a commitment with her because of work, how he listened to every one of the girls' stories with full attention. She saw how he had changed at the company too. People talked. They said Wesley was different, more approachable, more human. He didn't win back my love, Nina thought, watching him play with Josie in the living room. But he won our daughter's respect, and mine. It was true. What she felt for Wesley now was no longer romantic love that had died a long time ago, but it was something more solid. Respect for the father he was becoming. Gratitude for the man he had chosen to be. At bedtime, Wesley read a story to Josie. It was a ritual they had developed. "One more chapter, Daddy. Tomorrow, Princess, it's getting late." Wesley tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and was getting up when she held his hand. "Daddy, what is it? Will you be here tomorrow too?" The question still caught Wesley by surprise. Josie asked it as if she still couldn't quite believe he wouldn't disappear. "Every day," he replied, as he always did. "Every day, for the rest of my life." Josie smiled and closed her eyes. "Okay." Wesley left the room and found Nina in the living room. "Kark, she asked again if you'll be here tomorrow," Nina said. "She did. And you replied, 'Every day.'" Nina stopped putting away toys and looked at him. "And you intend to keep that promise?" "I do." There was something in his voice, a certainty, a determination that Nina recognized. It was the same firmness he used for business decisions, but directed towards something infinitely more important. "She trusts you," Nina said. "I know, and I won't disappoint her." "Good night, Wesley." "Good night, Nina." Wesley left the apartment and slowly walked down the stairs. In the car, he sat for a few minutes before starting the engine. Outside, Nina watched from the window. She saw him finally drive away, but not before he looked up at the apartment where his daughter was sleeping. He came back, she thought, smiling for the first time in a long time. But not like before. He came back right. And for the first time since Wesley reappeared in their lives, Nina was certain she had made the right choice. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.